the wealthiest people I know, the ones with 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, most of them have the majority of their liquid net worth in index funds. Boring, simple index funds. Because they're not trying to beat the market. They're trying to stay wealthy. And the easiest way to stay wealthy, control costs and don't do stupid things. Hello, friends. This is Tyler Gardner welcoming you to another episode of your Money Guide on the Side, where it is my job to simplify what seems complex, add nuance to what seems simple, and learn from and alongside some of the brightest minds in money, finance, and investing. So let's get started and get you one step closer to where you need to be. Welcome back, everyone, to the show where we talk about investing like actual humans who have lives to live, not like hedge fund managers who spend 16 hours a day staring at Bloomberg terminals, pretending they're about to crack the code to beating that thing that we all know simply can't be beaten over time, the S&P 500. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we're tackling a question I've gotten approximately 136 times since I released my How to Invest $2 Million episode a few months back. The question goes something like this. Okay, Tyler, I really liked the $2 million episode, but what if I have $5 million or $10 million? Surely the strategy changes then, right? Surely there's some secret allocation or private investment or alternative asset class I should know about once I hit a certain wealth threshold. And my answer, which will probably disappoint some of you, is this. Nope, not really. The fundamentals don't change. The complexity doesn't need to increase. And the people telling you that you need a completely different strategy once you cross $5 million are usually the ones trying to sell you said strategy. Because here's what you need to know. Whether you have $50,000 or $50 million, investing comes down to the same core principles: time horizon, risk tolerance, goals, tax efficiency, and diversification that actually makes sense, not diversification for the sake of sounding sophisticated at cocktail parties. So today, we're going to break down 4 portfolio options, from the simplest possible approach to a slightly more sophisticated allocation, and I'm going to show you why nobody at any level of wealth needs anything more complex than what we're covering today. 1 fund, 2 funds, 3 funds, 5 funds. That's it. Pick the one that matches your timeline and temperament, and then go live your life. But first, and I promise this is the last time I'll ask today, if you've been listening to this podcast and finding it useful, would you consider leaving a review on Apple or Spotify? It genuinely helps other people discover the show, and it also helps me know that people are listening and that some of it might prove useful to somebody out there, and I'm not just shouting into the eternal financial literacy void. Thank you. Also, quick note, a lot of today's content comes from the investing chapters in my forthcoming book with Norton, which drops in early December 2026. I'm incredibly excited about it, and if this episode resonates, the book will go way deeper on all of this. But we'll talk more about that later. All right. Let's talk now about how to invest at every level of wealth without losing your dang mind. First, the big lie about wealth and complexity. Here's what the financial industry wants you to continue to believe. The more money you have, the more complex your investments need to be. Once you hit $1 million, you need a financial advisor. Once you hit 5 million, you need to add alternative investments. Once you hit 10 million, you need private equity, hedge funds, and a family office with a guy named Thaddeus who wears cufflinks and speaks in acronyms. And look, I'm not saying those things are always bad. I'm saying they're almost never necessary, and they're often worse than the simple approach, and certainly more expensive. Because here's what actually matters in investing. Time horizon, asset allocation, tax efficiency, and fees. That's it. Those 4 things determine about 95% of your long-term returns. Everything else, stock picking, timing the market, alternative investments, private deals, that's noise. It might make you feel sophisticated. It might give you something to talk about at dinner parties for those of you who actually go to dinner parties. But it probably, and by probably I mean it won't, make you any richer. So, whether you're investing $100,000 or $10 million, the question isn't what exotic investments should I add? The question is, what's my time horizon? What's my risk tolerance? And what's the simplest portfolio that gets me there? And that's what we're breaking down today. 4 portfolios, 4 levels of complexity, all of them work. None of them require a PhD in finance or a phone call to Goldman Sachs. Let's start with the simplest option. Portfolio 1, the one fund wonder, and I would encourage this for anyone in their 20s and 30s. If you're in your 20s and 30s, you have decades until retirement, and you don't want to think about investing more than once a year. Here's your portfolio. One fund. That's it. Specifically, VTI, Vanguard's Total Stock Market ETF, or VOO, Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF. VTI owns literally everything. Over 3,500 US publicly traded companies, from Apple and Microsoft down to tiny companies you've never heard of. You buy VTI, you own the entire US stock market. Done. VOO, Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, owns the 500 largest US companies. It's more concentrated than VTI, but the performance is almost identical because those 500 companies make up about 80% of the total market anyway. Now, here's a question I get all the time. Tyler, which one should I buy, VTI or VOO? Honestly, tomato, tomato. Either one is fine, well, more than fine. Either one is exceptional for a core holding. The difference is marginal, but if you're forcing me to pick, I would take VOO, and here's why. The S&P 500 has a built-in quality filter. To get into the S&P 500, a company has to meet specific criteria: profitability, market cap, liquidity. And if a company starts to falter, it gets kicked off the island. The S&P doesn't hold on to losers out of loyalty. It replaces them with winners. VTI, on the other hand, owns everything, including the 2,500 plus smaller companies that might never become winners. Now, some of those will. And when they do, VTI captures that upside. But most of them won't, and you're holding dead weight in the meantime. The S&P 500, by design, is a winners-only index. It weights companies by market cap, so the biggest, most successful companies get the most space in your portfolio. Apple's doing great, you own more of it. Some random mid-cap company is tanking, you barely own any of it. And if it keeps tanking, it gets removed entirely. That said, and I cannot stress this enough, both funds are excellent. The historical performance difference is like 0.1% annually. So if you already own VTI and you're wondering if you should sell it and buy VOO, the answer is no, you shouldn't. Don't create a taxable event over a rounding error. Just pick one and move on with your life. Now, why does the one fund portfolio work so well for people in their 20s and 30s? Simple. Time horizon. If you're 28 years old and you won't touch this money for 35 years, short-term volatility, which is typically associated with the stock market, it doesn't matter. The market could drop 40% tomorrow, and you'd still have 3 decades for it to recover and grow. In fact, you should be hoping for a crash so you can buy more shares at a discount. The one fund portfolio is 100% stocks, no bonds, no gold, no crypto, no alternative assets, just pure public equity exposure. And over long time horizons, 20, 30, 40 years, stocks have historically returned around 10% annually before inflation or about 7% after inflation. Is it volatile? Yes. Will there be years where you lose 20 to 30% of the value? Absolutely. But if you're young and you can stomach the swings, this is the highest expected return you can get with the least amount of effort. One fund, set it and forget it, retire rich. But here's the thing, Not everyone is 28 with a 40-year time horizon. And not everyone can handle watching their portfolio drop 30% without panicking. Which brings us to our next option. Here's something I believe more deeply every year. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't feel good physically, none of it actually matters. I work out every morning for about an hour or two before I sit down to create content. Newsletter, social posts, podcast episodes, all of it. And for years, I'd finish my workout, sit down at my desk, and by 1 p.m., I'd be staring at my computer like it owed me money, wondering why I couldn't think straight and had a headache. Turns out, I was just chronically underhydrated. Not, I need water dehydrated, I needed electrolytes. Sodium, potassium, magnesium. The stuff you actually lose when you sweat. That's where LMNT comes in. It's an electrolyte drink with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium, and best part, 0 sugar. Which means I can rehydrate without drinking what tastes like liquefied candy. So here's my new routine. I drink LMNT during or right after my workout, and I'm sharp all morning and into the afternoon. Then I take a walk in the woods, make more content, and when I get back, I have a sparkling LMNT around 4 p.m., which is genuinely the most refreshing thing I have found. Then I work for a few more hours and still feel great. My favorite flavor? Mango chili. It's got a little heat, a little tang, and if you're the kind of person who thinks most electrolyte drinks taste like disappointment, this one doesn't. And if you can't handle the spice, watermelon salt is a close second. And here's the practical part. LMNT comes in tiny stick packs that take up almost 0 room. I just packed 150 sticks for my cross-country road trip to Arizona so I could stay hydrated in the desert, and it took up about as much space as a small t-shirt. And right now, they're offering a free sample pack with any purchase. So head to drinklmnt.com/Tyler. That's drinklmnt.com/Tyler. And do try the mango chili. You'll either love it or think I'm insane. Either way, at least you'll be hydrated. This episode is brought to you by Anthropic. I want to tell you about something I actually use every single hour I'm awake. Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI for minds that don't stop at good enough. It's the collaborator that actually understands your entire workflow and thinks with you, whether you're debugging code at midnight or strategizing your next business move. Claude extends your thinking to tackle the problems that matter. Here's what I mean. While writing my book for Norton, I had a world-class editor, but I didn't have the ability to bug her at midnight when I was deep in the writing cave, staring at a paragraph about tax loss harvesting, wondering if I could make a joke about it without sounding like a sociopath. Enter Claude. In my quasi-delirious writing fog, I could ask questions at all hours, like, does this analogy about compound interest and sourdough starter make any sense? Or my personal favorite, is this sentence actually funny? And full disclosure, you can thank Claude for cutting out 87 jokes from my forthcoming book that weren't nearly as funny as I once apparently thought they were. I've been using Claude as my assistant for over 3 months, and it's not just good at this stuff, it's better than anything else I've tried, especially for long-form content where you need context, nuance, and an AI that won't hallucinate some stat that makes you look like a complete ding-dong. So if you're a writer, creator, or just someone who is ready to tackle bigger problems, get started with Claude today at claude.ai/Tyler. That's claude.ai/Tyler. And don't forget to check out Claude Pro, which I use, which includes access to all of the features mentioned in today's episode. Portfolio number 2, the two-fund balance. This is for risk management. Okay, so maybe you're not 25 anymore. Maybe you're 40 or 50 or 60. Or maybe you're 30, but you know yourself well enough to admit that if the market crashes 40%, you're probably going to panic sell and lock in the losses. Or maybe you just want to sleep a little better at night. Enter the two-fund portfolio. VTI, Vanguard's total stock market ETF, and BND. VTI is still your stock exposure, total US stock market. BND is Vanguard's total bond market ETF. It owns thousands of US government and high-grade corporate bonds. Bonds are boring, they don't grow much, but they also don't crash as much. And when stocks tank, bonds tend to hold steady or even go up slightly. The two-fund portfolio is about balance, and it's about your learning about risk management. You get growth from stocks and stability from bonds. And the closer you get to needing the money, the more you can shift to bonds. Now, here's where people ask, how much should I put in stocks versus bonds? There was an old rule of thumb that was 100 minus your age is what you should put in stocks. So if you're 40, you'd have 60% stocks, 40% bonds. If you're 60, flip it, 40% stocks and 60% bonds. Some people now use numbers that are closer to 110 or even 120 minus your age because we want to account for longer lifespans. So if you're 40, that would be closer to 70 or 80% in stocks. But here's my actual take. I think I've said this a couple times before. Age-based formulas are very lazy. They're a decent starting point, but they ignore the most important question, which is, when do you actually need this money? And the assumption has always been that just because you get older, you need the money today. If you're 50 years old, but you're not retiring until 70, you still have a 20-year time horizon. You don't need 50% bonds. You can still be quite aggressive. If you're 35, but you're planning to use this money to buy a house in 5 years, you shouldn't be 100% stocks because you need some more stability. So instead of thinking about age, think about timeline. The sooner you need the money, the more bonds you should hold. The longer your timeline, the more stocks you can hold. Here's a rough guide. If you need money in 0 to 3 years, it should be 100% bonds or cash. Don't put any of this in stocks. If you need the money in 3 to 10 years, you could do 50 to 70% bonds, 30 to 50% stocks to capture some growth. But if you don't need the money for 10 to 20 years, now we're talking 30 to 50% bonds, 50 to 70% stocks. And if you don't need the money for 20 plus years, 0 to 30% bonds and 70 to 100% stocks. The two-fund portfolio is perfect for people who want simplicity, but also want to manage some risk. You're still invested in the market, you're still getting growth, but you've added a cushion so that when stocks drop 30%, your portfolio only drops 20%. And psychologically, that can make it way easier to stay invested, and staying invested is the name of the game. So, now some of you might be thinking, but Tyler, I don't want to manually rebalance this every year. Can't someone just do this for me? Yes, and that brings us to our third option. Portfolio number 3, the target date fund. Set it and forget it forever. Target date funds are basically the two-fund portfolio on autopilot. You pick a fund based on when you plan to retire, let's say 2050 or 2060, and the fund automatically adjusts your stock to bond ratio as you get older. When you're young, it might be 90% stocks. As you age, it gradually shifts toward bonds. By the time you hit retirement, it's something like 40% stocks, 60% bonds, and you never have to think about it. Examples: Vanguard's Target Retirement 2050, VFIFX, Fidelity Freedom Index 2055, FDEWX, or Schwab's Target 2060 or Schwab's Target 2060 Index Fund, SWYNX. These funds are brilliant for people who genuinely do not want to think about investing. You pick one fund, you contribute to it every month, and you never look at it again until you retire. It is the ultimate set it and forget it strategy. And honestly, for most people, this is enough. You don't need anything fancier. You don't need international exposure beyond what's already in the fund. You don't need real estate or gold or crypto. You just need to keep contributing and let time do its thing. But here's the catch that some people, including myself, do not love about these. Target date funds make the decisions for you. And if you want more control, if you want to decide exactly how much international exposure you have, or if you want to adjust your bond allocation based on your specific situation, you might need option number 4. Portfolio 4, the 3-fund Bogle portfolio. This is for people who, like me, like control. This is the classic John Bogle portfolio named after the founder of Vanguard and the godfather of index investing. And it consists of 3 funds: U.S. stocks through VTI or VOO, or any total stock market or S&P 500 ETF of your choice. That should be about 60 to 70% of your portfolio. But then we'd also dabble in international stocks, and you could do that through a fund like Vanguard's VXUS. That would be 20 to 30% of the portfolio. And then, you guessed it, U.S. bonds through something like BND. And that would be 10 to 30% of your portfolio, depending, again, on your timeline. The 3-fund portfolio gives you everything you need: U.S. stocks, international diversification, and bond stability. And you control the allocation. So, unlike the 2-fund portfolio, why do we now add international stocks? Well, because the U.S. isn't the only market in the world. VXUS and other international funds like it own stocks from Europe, Asia, emerging markets, everywhere except the U.S. And while U.S. stocks have dominated for a while, that's not always the case. And in the 2000s, international stocks did outperform. Diversification across markets does reduce risk. Now, how much international exposure should you have? That depends who you ask. Some people say as much as 30 to 40% because that matches global market capitalization. Some say 20% because the US is usually more stable. Some say 0% because they're betting on American exceptionalism. I generally recommend between 10 and 30%, depending on what you like. Enough to benefit if international markets outperform, but not so much that you're overexposed to currency risk and political instability in developing markets. The 3-fund portfolio is perfect for people who want more control than a target date fund, but don't want to overthink it. You rebalance once a year. If stocks have gone up and bonds have gone down, sell some stocks, buy some bonds, get back to your target allocation. Takes 10 minutes, you're done. This is the portfolio I used for years. It's simple, tax efficient, diversified, and boring. And as always, boring is good. This episode is brought to you by Facet. If you are 3 to 5 years from retirement, here are 3 things I'd be thinking about right now. These are critical decisions that will either save you tens of thousands or cost you that much if you get them wrong. Medicare and IRMA. Medicare premiums are based on your income from 2 years prior. A high income year, big bonus, Roth conversion, business sale, can spike your premiums from $200 a month to over $680 a month. That's an extra $5,000 to $6,000 annually because you didn't plan ahead. Roth conversions. The years between retirement and claiming Social Security are often your lowest tax window. Convert too much and you trigger IRMA or jump tax brackets. Convert too little and you miss the opportunity. Then require distributions kick in at 73 and lock you into higher taxes permanently. And Social Security timing. Claim early and you get additional income security. Delay and you get bigger payments plus potentially larger survivor benefits. The right call depends on your health, assets, and family situation. Get it wrong and it costs you for life. The problem, most people don't realize they need a plan until it's too late. You can't undo a conversion that spiked your Medicare costs, and you can't reclaim missed tax advantages. That's where Facet comes in. They provide you with a team of CFP professionals who can help model your income, plan conversions, navigate IRMA, and strategize Social Security, all for a flat annual membership fee. Learn more by connecting with Facet today at facet.com/Tyler and get the strategy right before you're locked in. That's facet.com/Tyler. Facet is an SEC registered investment advisor. This is not advice. All opinions are my own and not a guarantee of a similar outcome. I'm not a member of Facet. I have an incentive to endorse Facet as I have an ongoing fee-based contract for cash compensation, as well as a percentage of equity in Facet based on this endorsement. Now, maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, but what about real estate? What about gold? And what about crypto? Don't we want to add those for diversification? You could. And that brings us to our fifth option. Portfolio number 5. This is the 2.0 allocation, and it's for optimization and to find what we call non-correlation. We'll get into that. This is where things get slightly more, I don't want to say sophisticated because that sometimes has positive connotations. It's where things get a little more complex and a little more appropriate for those who really want to optimize mathematically. It's still not complicated, but it is more intentional. The 5-fund portfolio looks like this. Again, start with our core of US stocks through VTI or VOO, 50 to 60%. Now we're going to add some international stocks through VXUS, 15 to 20%. Now we're going to add some bonds through BND, 10 to 20%. But now we might want one more inflation hedge through something having to do with real estate, like a real estate investment trust through Vanguard's VNQ, 5 to 10%. Finally, you could add a small holding in either gold or crypto, depending on your needs and wants, of 0 to 5%. Why would we add these extra asset classes? Because they don't always move in the same direction as stocks. And when stocks crash, having 5 to 10% in something that doesn't crash or that crashes less can smooth out your returns and help you stay invested. Now, in the 2-fund portfolio, that's exactly what bonds were doing. But as recently as 2022, remember that stocks and bonds both were actually surprisingly correlated during that specific downturn. And yes, a portfolio would have benefited to have a little more exposure to either commodities or real estate or crypto. But let's talk about each asset class and what it can add to your portfolio. Real estate. If we were to add a fund like VNQ, that's Vanguard's real estate ETF. It owns REITs, real estate investment trusts, which are companies that own and operate income-generating properties like apartments, office buildings, warehouses, and shopping centers. REITs are required to pay out 90% of their income as dividends, so VNQ will give you steady income plus potential appreciation. And real estate doesn't always move with stocks. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. This non-correlation is valuable. Or gold, through a fund like GLD. Gold is the ultimate I don't trust anything hedge. It doesn't produce income, it doesn't grow earnings, it just sits there being shiny. But when everything else is falling apart, when inflation spikes, when currencies collapse, when geopolitical chaos erupts, gold tends to hold its value or even go up. Or finally, you could have crypto through Bitcoin or Ethereum. This one's a little more controversial, and I'm not going to tell you to invest in crypto, but I will say this. Bitcoin originally had very low correlation with stocks and bonds, but recently it has become far more correlated with stocks. Over the last decade, Bitcoin has massively outperformed every other asset class. Is it sustainable? We have no idea. But if you believe in the technology and you can stomach the volatility, putting 1 to 3% in Bitcoin isn't insane. I just wouldn't bet the farm. Now, here's the key. These additional asset classes are small allocations. We're talking 5 to 10% combined, not 30 to 40%. The bulk of your portfolio, the core holdings, 70 to 80%, is still stocks and bonds, because we're not abandoning the fundamentals. We're just adding a little insurance and a little potential upside. The 5-fund portfolio is for people who want to optimize, who want to think about correlation and diversification in a more intentional way, who want to hedge against inflation, currency risk, and black swan events without getting too fancy. But, and this is important, you don't need the 5-fund portfolio to be successful. The 3-fund portfolio works just as well for 99% of people. The 5-fund portfolio is for the tinkerers among us, for people who enjoy this stuff. If that's not you, don't force it. So, which portfolio should you choose? All right, let's bring this home. You got 4 options. 1 fund, VTI or VOO, perfect if you're young. You got decades until retirement, and you want maximum simplicity and maximum growth. 100% stocks, high volatility, high returns. 2 fund portfolio, VTI plus BND. Perfect if you want to manage risk without overthinking it. Adjust your stock to bond ratio based on your timeline, not your age. Rebalance once a year. 3 fund Boglehead portfolio, VTI plus VXUS plus BND. Perfect if you want to add global diversification and more control over your allocation. A little more work, but still incredibly simple. Target Date Fund. Perfect if you want to set it and forget it forever. The fund does everything for you, 0 effort required. Or the 5-fund 2.0, VTI, VXUS, BND, VNQ, plus gold or BTC. Perfect if you want to optimize for non-correlation and you enjoy thinking about this stuff, but not necessary, potentially beneficial. Now, here's what I want you to notice. None of these portfolios include individual stocks. None of them include private equity. None of them require a financial advisor charging you 1% annually. None of them require you to time the market or pick the next apple. And none of them change based on how much money you have. Whether you're investing $50,000 or $5 million, the principles are identical. The allocation might shift slightly based on your timeline and goals, but the core strategy does not change. You're still buying diversified funds, rebalancing occasionally, and letting compound growth do the work. The people who tell you that $5 million requires private equity or hedge funds or alternative investments, I promise they're usually the ones selling you those very products, and they're making a heck of a lot more money than you are off of selling you complexity, not returns. So here is the trap of overcomplicated wealth. Once you cross certain thresholds, the financial industry starts treating you differently. Surprise, you get invited to exclusive investor events. You get pitched on private deals that are only accessible to you. You get introduced to sophisticated strategies that promise higher returns with lower risk. And some of those strategies are legitimate, but most of them are just expensive, tax inefficient, illiquid versions of what you could get in a simple index fund. I know people with $10 million who invest in private equity funds that charge 2% annually, plus an additional 20% of the profits. And after fees, taxes, and illiquidity, they'd have been much better off in VTI. But they get to tell their friends that they're in private equity, so it feels slightly fancy. I also know people with $10 million who own 3 index funds, rebalance once a year, and spend time doing anything else. And they're usually outperforming the private equity guy because they're not paying 2% in fees. They're not locked up for 10 years, and they're not trying to impress anyone. Complexity is not a badge of honor. It's usually just very expensive. So if you have $5 million or $10 million and you're wondering if you should be doing something more sophisticated, you need to ask yourself, why? What is that voice that is speaking to me and telling me I need to do something more complex? Is it because you genuinely believe it will improve your returns? Or is it because you want to feel like you're part of an exclusive club? And if you're really honest with yourself, my guess is that you will understand why the industry starts treating you differently, because it can make an insane amount of money off of you. So of course, it's going to try to pitch you and tell you that there are options out there that are only reserved for people like you who are sophisticated and deserve elite status and the best investments possible. You know what the best investment possible is? VTI. Because here's the truth. The wealthiest people I know, the ones with 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, most of them have the majority of their liquid net worth is in index funds. And if they do own a private business, it's usually their own. But their investment portfolio, boring, simple index funds. Because they're not trying to beat the market. They're trying to stay wealthy. And the easiest way to stay wealthy, control costs and don't do stupid things. So, here's what I want you to take away from today. 1. The complexity of your portfolio should not scale with your wealth. More money doesn't mean you need more funds or fancier investments. It just means you have more of the same good investments. 2. Pick a portfolio that matches your timeline and your temperament. If you're young and aggressive, go 1 fund. If you're older or risk averse, go 2 fund or 3 fund. If you don't want to think about it, go target date. And if you want to optimize, go 5 fund. But pick 1 and stick with it. 3. Rebalance once a year. That's it. Do not check your portfolio daily. Don't panic sell when the market crashes. Just rebalance annually and get on with your life. 4. Ignore anyone who tells you that wealth requires complexity. It doesn't. Accredited investor is not a badge of honor. Wealth requires discipline, patience, and the ability to not do dumb things. And one of those dumb things is to actually pick up the phone when your respective brokerage house calls you and says they have new specific investments reserved just for you because you've crossed the $1 million threshold. And 5, the goal isn't to have the most sophisticated portfolio. The goal is to have enough money to do what you want, when you want, with people you care about, and a simple 3-fund portfolio gets you there as well as any hedge fund, and it's actually accessible. All right, that's it for today. I'm not going to ramble because it is that simple. And if this was helpful or helped you clarify or simplify anything in your own investing life, please consider leaving a review as it does help more people find the show. Thanks for listening, and as always, I hope this gives you something to think about throughout the week ahead. Thanks for tuning in to your Money Guide on the Side. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to visit my website at tylergardner.com for even more helpful resources and insights. And if you are interested in receiving some quick and actionable guidance each week, don't forget to sign up for my weekly newsletter, where each Sunday I share 3 actionable financial ideas to help you take control of your money and investments. You can find the sign-up link on my website, tylergardner.com, or on any of my socials at socialcapofficial. Until next time, I'm Tyler Gardner, your money guide on the side, and I truly hope this episode got you one step closer to where you need to be.